Okay, we're going to continue, and I'd like to give you a summation in a case that I tried in Nassau County this past spring. And it was a case that had certain problems with it. It was a case of sexual abuse of a young girl and a young boy, 15-year-old girl and a 14-year-old boy, and it involved a church in Nassau County. There are certain problems with that, and I just want to alert you to the problems. One of the problems is the pedophile who did this was a youth minister, and he was convicted of rape. He was convicted of sodomy. Not an issue in the case as far as I was concerned. As far as the defense was concerned, the main issue in the case. But in a case like this, the one thing that plaintiffs don't want is we don't want a finding of just negligence. And the reason we don't want a finding of just negligence is negligence doesn't do it for us. There are limitations of Article 16, and I know some of you are familiar with this, which would mean that in the event we get a split where, for example, the criminal defendant is found 90% responsible versus 10% for the church, well, that reduces the verdict significantly. But if there is a verdict which states that there is a reckless indifference to the safety of others, recklessness, that standard is something that is so significant that we can then hurdle the problems, the limitations of Article 16, and then joint and several liability attaches, and you actually collect the full amount. So this entire case was focused on showing recklessness, not just negligence. And the problem in the case, of course, is that we had a pedophile that we had to deal with. So what I'm going to attempt to do right now is to reduce a 2-hour summation into 20 minutes and see if we can handle that. May it please the court, counsel, ladies and gentlemen of the jury. My adversary, Mr. Davies, stood here and he told you point blank that there is one person to blame and only one person to blame for the events that took place here. And he pointed squarely at the youth minister, Matthew Maiello, and he said, this is the man who raped a young girl, this is the man who sodomized a young boy, this is the man who is responsible. It would be wrong for you to return any verdict finding the Diocese of Rockville Center at fault. Understand, this is not a case about religion. It has never been a case about religion. It has been a case about what took place with regard to the hiring of Matthew Maiello and the retention of that man. We have said from the outset, you heard me say in jury selection, there is no issue that Matthew Maiello, this youth minister, was convicted of rape. And there is no issue that he was certainly convicted of sodomy and multiple counts of that. It has never been an issue in this case. But the real issue in this case is this. Why was Matthew Maiello, the youth minister, allowed to be on the premises of that parish? Why in the world was he allowed to be there? Why in the world was he allowed to have access to children? That's the question that has to be answered in this case. Because if you look at it and you scrutinize what was taking place, that man had to be hired before he could ever prey upon these young children. And what he did was this. He applied for a job. We heard from Father Tom Haggerty. Father Haggerty is the head of that parish. He is the one with whom the decision-making resolves. He has the last word as to who will be hired and who will not be hired. And in fact, he said something to you that becomes all important in this case. He said, when he was asked on our examination, what was the most important group of people in your church, in your parish? And he said the most important group of people are the children. He said, can we agree that there's certainly their care, their safety, their well-being is paramount to anyone else in the church? Absolutely, without a doubt. So there you have Father Tom Haggerty saying one thing. If we put a spectrum and we look at the one side of the spectrum, we have his words saying, those children are more important than anyone. There is no one more important than the children. Their safety is of paramount concern. But there's a saying that we all know. And the saying that we all know is something you've heard since you've been a kid, and that is, actions speak louder than words. So we have his words on the one hand, and if we take a look at the other side of the spectrum, we have the words, we have the actions. Take a look at what happened here. This man has to be hired. If you're going to hire someone, and you know they're going to be working with children, not just for a few hours, but for days, for months, for years, and they're going to have access to these children, during the daytime, during the afternoon, coming into the evening hours? Don't you think you ought to at least get a job application to find out where this man has worked in the past? Would that be asking too much? Of course not. Did they do this? No. But we brought forth evidence for you concerning the hiring. One of the first things that we did was we said, let's find out, where did this man go to school? Because there's a requirement that the church has. And the requirement that they have is no one can be hired as a youth minister unless he has a college degree. Don't you think they should have ordered the transcripts? And then you look at the transcripts. We put them into evidence, and you saw this. Was this astonishing? If you look at the transcripts and you see what has taken place, and you take a look knowing that this man is being brought into this church to teach these children Bible studies, do you think you'd want to know, did he take any courses in Bible studies? Well, sure enough, he did. He took a course at Malloy College called Bible Studies. And the grade that he received? The grade that he received was an F. He failed Bible studies. Do you think that would have sent up a red flag? Don't hire this man? At no time did they take a look at this. But there was another grade that was equally intriguing. And the other grade that he received from Hofstra, because he never did complete his studies at Malloy, nor did he complete it in Hofstra. But the grade that he received in this course speaks volumes. He took a course called The Psychology of Women. And in the Psychology of Women, he received a grade. And the grade that he received was an A. So on the one hand, you have an A in the Psychology of Women and an F in Bible studies, and they don't even take a look at this. Is that reckless conduct? Doesn't that surpass just negligent conduct? Isn't that a red flag saying, don't hire this man? But it gets worse still. Because if you're going to hire somebody who you know is going to be working with children, and children are the most important concern, the most paramount concern that we have, don't you think you'd want to find out where he worked in the past? Well, we brought in his records of where he worked in the past. He was going to be a youth minister teaching the children to sing. He had worked at a music store, a store called Sam Ash in Westbury. And there, when you look at his records, he was suspended for insubordination. He was suspended because he spoke in vulgar terms to clients, customers. And no one takes a look at this. No one sees what's going on. Is this the man that we want to work with these children? Reckless conduct. The defense says, but where's the actual notice? We didn't know. We didn't know about this. We don't have to look there. You're working with children. You have to look there. Father Thomas Haggerty tells you, I called for a recommendation. I called to where he had worked as an assistant youth minister out in Syosset before he came to our parish. But then we called the youth minister of the Syosset parish. And we said, did you speak to Father Haggerty? Did you speak to him about a recommendation? He said, yes. Father Haggerty did call me. Well, what happened? He asked me for a recommendation for Matthew Maiello. And what did you say? I said, this is unbelievable. He said, I told Father Haggerty, I cannot give you a positive recommendation. I cannot give you a positive recommendation. And Father Haggerty says, thank you, and gets off the phone. Doesn't it demand two questions? Doesn't that demand the two questions that all of us would ask? Why or why not? Think about it this way. If there is a babysitter and someone's going to allow their child, not you, but someone's going to allow their child to be watched by a babysitter, not for weeks or months or years, but for 2 hours, and that parent is smart enough to call another parent who had this babysitter in the past and says, I'd like a recommendation. What can you tell me about that babysitter? And the parent says, I cannot give you a positive recommendation. Do you think for 1 second any parent in their right mind would say, please come on board, watch my child? Is there any doubt that this is reckless conduct? We are not saying, nor have we ever said, that Matthew Maiello is without fault, but when you know point blank that you don't take the next step to ask about someone who has not been given a positive recommendation, what in the world is going on here? And there's one other factor that we learned. We called the business manager for the diocese. Connell Friel is his name. And we asked him, did you speak to Father Haggerty about the hiring? Yes, I did. What did you say to him? And Conall Friel said this. He said, I told Father Haggerty that Matthew Maiello had boundary issues. Well, what in the world does boundary issues mean? It means he doesn't know when his personal life ends and when his professional life begins. What in the world is going on in the hiring of this man when you know with actual notice that he should never have been hired, when you don't even check his transcripts, when you don't even check his job applications, when your conduct is so reckless you cannot say, blame someone else. You have to look back at the mirror in front to see yourself, because they are certainly at fault for what they did here. And then Matthew Maiello is brought on. And when he's brought on, what was the retention like? What did they know about this? Now he's apt to prey on these young children, and that's exactly what happened. A young girl, 15 years old. They give Matthew Maiello an office, not in an area where they could see him, in the convent, downstairs, where no one can see what's going on, except for one thing. This young girl rides up on her bicycle, parks the bicycle outside, and then goes into the convent where the nuns are, downstairs to Matthew Maiello, the youth minister's office, and there he starts his ways. And it's there that we know that he took this young girl's virginity. And it's there that we know that he engaged in oral sex, sexual intercourse, anal sex. And he did this repeatedly. And the one thing that he used as his weapon was that he said, God wants us to be together. So he certainly knew how to manipulate. Perhaps that course that he received an A in college in had something to do with this. But he wasn't done there, because he wasn't satisfied with just having this young woman. In fact, there was a 14-year-old boy, a boy in 8th grade, who was religious, just like this young woman, and he brought him into his office with the young girl there. And he said to this young boy, how would you like to see a naked woman? He was scared. He didn't know what to do, this young boy. He had no idea what to do. And he tells him what to do, and he tells him how to do it, and he watches while he masturbates, and you heard all about this. It was a difficult cross-examination to cross-examine this pedophile, but he brought out the facts, as did they. And sure enough, what took place was this young girl and this young boy were abused, not once, but hundreds of times. And he did something else. He had sexual relations with this young girl, not just in his office, but you heard about this, on the principal's desk, in the church, on the pews, behind the stage, on the stage. If anyone was looking, wouldn't they have seen what was going on? A parent complained to Father Haggerty that he had seen this youth minister kissing a young girl. The parent complained to him. Actual notice again. Instead of reaming out the youth minister and firing him on the spot, Father Haggerty takes another approach. And what he does is he says, how dare you for making these accusations? To the parent. And at that point in time, the parent quits the youth ministry. Others made complaints. Nothing was done. Nothing took place to end this. When Father Haggerty was asked about it, he told one woman, it's all right, we're not going to renew his contract next summer. So in other words, you're allowing this pedophile, this man, to be there, you're not checking, and this is what's going on? Ladies and gentlemen, they tell you that she's not so badly injured. In fact, isn't what they're really intimating, isn't what they're really suggesting, is that the sexual contact was consensual? This youth minister videotaped these children. That's why he can't get away from what he did, because it's in there on the tape. What happened to this young girl and what happened to this young boy? At 14 and 15 years old, and continued for a number of years, more than 250 acts of sodomy, rape. They cannot consent. There's no such thing as consent. For this young girl, is it any wonder that she has been scarred for life? For this young boy, he had never used drugs before meeting that youth minister, and now he's addicted to drugs because of the drugs that he plowed into them so that he could videotape them, so that he could, as he stated when I cross-examined him, get off on it. There's something wrong with this. and then the defense presents to you a doctor suggesting there is no post-traumatic stress disorder. Ladies and gentlemen, there are times when there is an injury that manifests itself outwardly, like a burn or a quadriplegic injury or a cervical injury that will leave someone with pins, plates, rods, and screws in a cage in their neck for life. But there are other injuries suffered by someone when they suffer a mental type of injury, an injury that will be with them for life that is every bit as severe. Well, I asked their doctor, who said they don't suffer from post-traumatic stress disorder, both of them. Dr. William Kaplan, he came in here. Doctor, would you agree with me? Would you agree with me that before you could render an opinion, you ought to make sure that you have a strong foundation in fact? Absolutely. In fact, you teach your residents, don't you? Sure. And you would make sure that your residents never render an opinion without reviewing the records, correct? Or without knowing the facts completely. Absolutely, that's true. Doctor, but of course, one of the things you tell your residents, remember this question? One of the things you tell your residents is, make sure you review the records on one patient to render an opinion on a different patient. He said, what are you talking about? I said, well, don't you tell them that in order to form an opinion, you have to take a look at somebody else's records to render an opinion on a different patient? He said, I would never do that. Let's take a look at your records, doctor, right here in your report. One of the things that you said you did was rely on certain records. Doctor, take a look at this record that you rely on for this young woman. It's from a different patient, having nothing to do with her. Oh, that's just a mistake. And it was then that I realized that this doctor doesn't even know the facts. Doctor, how often did they have sexual relations? I don't know, it's unimportant. Where did they have sexual relations? I don't know. When was this young man brought into this? I don't know. Were drugs used? I didn't hear that. Are you kidding us? You render an opinion without even knowing this? And I spent 2 hours going through the facts one day and another 3 hours the next, showing that he had no knowledge of the facts. Yet this is the doctor that they bring in to try and suggest to you that these children were not injured? Is there any doubt that they were injured? Is there any doubt that they have been scarred for life? Is there any doubt that they will live with this forever? But we deal with damages in this case not by looking at what is a quadriplegic injury or what is a paraplegic injury or a burn. We look at it in something completely different and something that most lawyers never get to speak about. But you tell me, what is the value? What is the value of loss of faith for Carrie, for this young girl? What is the value of loss of faith for this young man? What is the value when you've taken away from a religious family, and they are religious, and the religion is a fine religion, when they're put through this? What is the value of loss of virginity for both of them? What is the value of becoming addicted to drugs to the point where this young man can't go one day now without having drugs because he was involved in this relationship, having been sodomized over 200 times by this man? Ladies and gentlemen, certainly compensation has to be given. Fair compensation has to be given. While it is known that we can never come back and ask you for more compensation, we can certainly today make sure that you've given sufficient compensation. And that's exactly what we're asking for. From the time that these events first started from this young woman, up to today, we will ask you for an amount of money to fully, fairly, and adequately compensate. And the number that I'm going to suggest to you is a number that would be fair, and that is $5 million. But for the rest of her life, as a young woman in her early 20s right now, for the rest of her life, knowing that she can't engage in interpersonal relations, knowing that she's lost faith in something that she cherished dearly, knowing that she will never be able to sleep without nightmares and intrusive thoughts, even as Dr. Kaplan admitted she has, at least that amount for the future as well. And for this young man who has been so badly injured, for this young man who has become addicted to drugs by virtue of what that youth minister did to him, certainly at least $5 million for the past and a commensurate amount for the future. There is no question that the conduct here was reckless, and that reckless conduct allowed this to take place both in the negligent hiring, the reckless hiring, the negligent retention, and the reckless retention of that man, that youth minister. And there can be no other verdict that would be fair. Ladies and gentlemen, at this point in time, We are asking you for the one thing that you can award. And the one thing that you can award, and only you can award this, is the one thing that matters, and the one thing we're asking for. And that is 100% justice. Thank you. Okay. I know we've run slightly over. I'm going to ask the lawyers to stick around. Any questions right now that you have in the audience?
What was the verdict?
Verdict came in at $11.5 million. Okay. Thank you all for coming. We'll see you next.